All right, this is lecture 9b. So last time I talked about the establishment of the Roman Empire and the sort of heyday of the Roman Empire, which is the first 2 centuries CE. This was also a heyday of the Han Dynasty. And the sort of the most powerful phase of the Roman Republic was the first 2 centuries BCE, and that was the early Han Dynasty also. And then, of course, this corresponds to some of the empires in India. So what you see happening during this classical era, especially the era 200 BCE to 200 CE, is you see a period of growing stability. And one of the reasons for that is that when you have these big classical empires that stretch long distances, these big classical empires, the Parthians and the Sassanids and the Guptas and the Mauryan Empire and the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire, these big empires foster trade in a number of ways. First of all, as we saw with the Romans and also with the Han Dynasty, they're building roads, right? They're building fantastic roads because they want to move armies around and things like that, but this also helps trade because other people use the roads also, merchants. Second, they standardize currency, right? The Romans, the Parthians, the Sassanids, and the Han Dynasty, etc., they all standardize their currencies, and this makes trade much easier because merchants now don't have to deal with hundreds of different kinds of coins. They just have to deal with like 3 kinds of coins or 4 kinds of coins. And they know exactly, and because the currency is standardized, you know every coin has the same amount of gold and it is worth the same. In addition, big empires create peace, right? In the Roman Empire, they control the entire Mediterranean, so you can sail from one end of the Mediterranean to the other, and you know there won't be pirates because the Roman government has crushed all piracy, right? And you can do the road. You can take the road from one end of the Sassanid Empire to the other, and in relative peace because they have armies and outposts tracking down bandits and things. And you can travel in the Gupta Empire, the Mauryan Empire. You can travel in Han China, so it makes travel not necessarily risk-free, because it's not, but much more safe and therefore much more feasible. And so this helps increase trade also. So the better roads, the peace, and the standardized currency are all ways that these big classical empires foster trade. Now, there's a couple of moments that helped extend trade networks. The first was actually before the classical era, early in it, when Alexander the Great in the 300s, he creates this empire that connects Greece to India, and it didn't last that long, but by consciously bringing Greek colonists from Greece into Anatolia and then into Mesopotamia and Persia and then into India, what he does is he creates a set of trade networks that there are Greek communities in each of these cities all the way between India and Greece who can communicate with each other because they share the same language, they share the same culture, and there's a certain level of trust there that allows these trade networks to become much stronger. And so Alexander the Great, even though his empire doesn't last very long, has created the foundation for a trade network connecting the Mediterranean through Greece all the way to India. But then on the other end, there are feelers extended also. In 128 BCE, the Chinese explorer Zhang Jian started a series of 18 expeditions to try to find the best trade routes from China across Asia to India and then to Persia and Europe. And so he found a series of routes through the Taklamakan Desert, which is modern-day Mongolia and Central Asia, and he establishes these routes between China and Central Asia, and he meets up with routes that have been established by the Alexander the Great's trade routes, etc. And so you really start to see by the 120s BCE the creation of a trade network, a single trade network that connects China on the eastern end all the way over to Spain on the western end of the Roman Empire. And it includes the Persian empires, it includes India, it includes China, it includes the Roman Empire. Now, 2 key parts of this are that the Romans, under Pax, created what's called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which is that basically the entire Mediterranean basin is under a single set of laws and a single government, which stabilizes that. And then the Han and the Chinese end have an enormous amount of stability. And so those two become the anchors of this massive trade network. And the trade networks are collectively called the Silk Roads, although there's really two sets. There's the Silk Roads are a series of overland routes that go between China through Central Asia. There's sort of a spur down into India, but then they go through Central Asia, the Persian Empire, and then into the Mediterranean. And obviously silk is one of the things carried on this. But there's another set of trade routes called the spice routes, which are boat or naval trade routes that connect India by boat up into the Persian Gulf to the Persian Empire, and then up into the Red Sea to Egypt, etc., to the Roman Empire. And so those trade routes are also extended. Now they're pretty minimal at this point, and some of the spice routes are actually overland also. That they connect India, and people go by boat across to the Arabian Peninsula, and then by camel up the Arabian Peninsula to Egypt or Syria or what have you. But these sets of trade networks begin to have a fairly significant amount of trade. Now, overland trade in particular is not something you're not shipping bulk goods. You're not shipping wheat overland. You're not shipping timber overland, because that's simply too expensive to move, and it's not worth it enough when you get there. Now, there is trade in timber and wheat, etc., by boat. In the Mediterranean, wheat is going constantly from Egypt to Rome, for instance. But you're not going to hear about, Egyptian wheat winding up in China or winding up in the Gupta Empire. Instead, over the Silk Roads and the spice routes, what you get is stuff that's expensive but lightweight. Silk is one thing; it's fairly lightweight and it's worth a lot. Spices. You have India produces peppers and things like that. China produces ginger and cinnamon and stuff like that, and then places like the Arabian Peninsula produce frankincense, which is it's an incense. And so these spices are fantastically expensive, and they travel really well, and they're lightweight. So they become important trade goods. And you also get jewels and gold things, and things that are high value but small and easy to carry are good trade goods. And so you start to see a regular trade here. So in other words, people in the Roman Empire have regular access, if they have the money, have regular access to Indian pepper or Chinese ginger or something like that. And this begins to transform lives. And this is, I don't want to oversell the Silk Roads. The volume of goods there is fairly small, and it's not like it's nothing like the volume of goods that we move around to the world today. And there will be some big jumps, and I'll talk about this later in the course. There's big jumps later in terms of seafaring trade that dramatically increase the amount of trade. So the Silk Roads are the beginning of a global trade network, but they are an important beginning. And one of the reasons they're really important also is that they don't just foster trade in goods, they foster the trade in ideas. We've already seen this a little bit. Buddhism starts in India, but it follows trade routes up into China and Southeast Asia and even into the Persian Empire. Zoroastrianism starts in the Persian Empire, but it winds up in India. And Manichaeanism, which I talked about before, was this religion that basically existed because of the Silk Roads. It starts in Mesopotamia, but it is created by blending Buddhism and Zoroastrianism and Christianity and Judaism all together into one new religion. And so it's basically only possible because all these people are traveling on the Silk Roads and talking about religions with each other. But then Manichaeanism spreads all the way from China to the Mediterranean because of the Silk Roads. And so there's cultural exchanges as well as trade good exchanges. And so the Silk Roads are the beginning of a process. They're just the beginning, but a process that would gradually go from, in the ancient world before the classical era, these different empires didn't really have much contact with each other. But now, with the Silk Roads, you're starting to see long-distance trade. And I really mean long-distance. The Silk Roads from China to Central Asia are like 2,500 miles, and then you're only then to, north of India, and then it's, you have to go through the whole Persian Empire and the whole Roman Empire to get to Spain. So we're talking thousands of miles. And so you're starting to see an integration of Eurasia, essentially Europe and Asia and North Africa. We're going to see more of that integration later, but this is a process that's starting now in the 300s BCE and the beginning of the classical era, you're starting to see trade networks emerge, and this process is continuing till today. That you're eating food that comes from South America and Asia and Europe, without even knowing where it's coming from, and you're getting goods processed all over the world. And trade today is a whole different ballgame. But this is the process that starts with Silk Roads in the early classical era.